Hello everyone, this is QC and today we are going to talk about the purpose of emotions. Are you ready?
Wait. No, I am not ready. You're talking about the purpose of emotions, but you've never explained what emotions are. Yeah, should I have started with defining emotions first? I mean, it is worth knowing what is that thing that is supposedly so useful, as I argued in the previous video. However, it seems like in everyday life we use the term emotions and talk about them without any problem, so should I assume that everyone knows what emotions are by this point? However, for some reason you clicked on this video and supposedly it was because you wanted to find out what emotions are. However, if you watched my previous video, then you must have been curious on what the purpose of emotions is, and therefore had a general idea of what emotions are, because if you hadn't had, then why would you have clicked on the video to find out what the purpose of something you don't know what it is and stop! This is getting too overcomplicated, and I was just supposed to answer a simple question. What is emotion? Yes, let's stick to it. So to answer this question, what is an emotion? The answer is... drum rolls please. It depends. I know, quite unsatisfying, huh? But that's the short answer. Well, if you want the longer answer, you can sit down and listen to the little story about emotions. Still here? Great, then let's begin. So the definition of emotion depends on who you ask. Over the years, various philosophers, psychologists, researchers, and other individuals have come up with various theories and definitions of emotions, not so rarely ones that contradict one another. For example, appraisal theorists would focus on the cognitive process involved in emotion development, while followers of the James Lange theory would argue that our physical responses are responsible for emotions. I could try to explain all theories of emotions, but it would probably take ages. So maybe I should just list them all? Well, apparently, that would also take quite some time, as the number of scientific definitions is huge. How huge? Well, two researchers had reviewed it before me and the number reached around 100. Not impressed? What if I tell you that they did it in an article from 1981? Over 40 years ago! I don't even dare to check how many definitions we have now. Anyways, you asked me what emotion is. I mean, you clicked on my video, so I assumed it is you asking me that, so... You asked me what emotion is, okay? So I will tell you about it, my way. So to answer that, I decided to help myself with Scherer's table, showing proposed emotions components. And to illustrate these components, I will use a very recent and relevant, not only to me situation, but to fellow students as well. Exams coming. So picture this, you're sitting in the aula, waiting for the exam paper to reach you. Have you studied enough? Are you ready? Was it enough to pass it? Or maybe you shouldn't have binged on that series or anime and should have studied more instead. Now it's too late anyway. In just a few minutes, you're gonna start taking the exam. But still, you have those thoughts. What if you don't pass? How would that affect you? If you don't pass, you're gonna have to study even more and have a little break with your favorite fictional characters, as they would have to wait till you retake the exam and pass it. And what if meanwhile you see some spoilers on the internet, and then others who certainly passed their exams and thus could enjoy watching the show up to date would have no mercy and tell you the crucial moments of it, and thus destroying your brittle heart with information that the main character and their love interest in the plot twist decided to... Of course, that was just an example. I have never had thoughts like this. Never, okay? Anyway, we just went with the cognitive component of emotion and evaluated the event, how it could impact us, and analyzed the information we had. And as you're assessing the situation of that exam that can influence your life and your relationship with your precious show, you might notice that your body reacts to the situation as well. You might start sweating, and not just because of that terrible heat in the aula. You might feel your body tremble as if it was made out of jello. And of course, the classic symptom, heart beating so fast that it could beat the light in a race. These are neurophysiological symptoms. Or to make it simpler, your body reactions. You're receiving the exam paper, and in about a minute, the exam is gonna start. You don't wanna fail it. You don't wanna have a break from watching your favorite show. You're scared of the consequences of failing the exam. That's why previously you tried studying, and now you're attempting to gather all your attention and focus on the exam. You motivate yourself to pay attention only to the questions and answers on that seemingly insignificant piece of paper and have nothing else what we call the motivational component of emotion. Yes, motivation. As in my previous video, emotions helped us get up from bed. Now they're helping us with focusing on the exam to pass it. The examinator gives a sign that the exam starts. You look at the paper. You see a million questions. Okay, maybe not a million, but it looks like it when you have a whole page filled with that little tiny fine print. And there's more than one page. You're scared to even count how many. Your eyebrows are raising, pulled together, and your upper eyelids are elevating as if they wanted to reach the ceiling and beyond. Your lower eyelids, on the other hand, are getting tensed. You feel your jaw dropping open and your lips stretching horizontally backwards, and from them, a soft moan escapes your mouth, the way you want to escape that exam. And here we have the motor expression component, which includes facial and vocal expression. Now we're left with the subjective feeling component, where it is tougher to me to still keep it as a story where you're staring. Why? Because it's the subjective part. I don't know what you're feeling in that situation. Only you can know. If it was me, I would probably say that I'm feeling fear, maybe some kind of anxiety. But it is my subjective feeling. You can have your own. That's why I'd say it's the most creative, yet the most difficult to research component of emotion. So I introduced you to an exemplary list of emotion components. I chose it as I think it collects the main theories of emotions into one set in a pretty good way. Also, Cher did some nice work with that table, and I thought it'd be the best to use to explain what emotion is. But Cuesee, that's quite a lot of components for an emotion. Are emotions really that complicated? Do they really have all those components? You may ask. At least that's what I imagine you are asking. If not, then, well, you can still nicely listen to my explanation? Now let me pretend you actually asked that. Aha, great question. Thank you for asking that. The answer is... drumrolls please. It depends. Yes, again, it's psychology, so get used to such answers. What I mean is that what components are essential for emotions is one of argument sources among emotion theorists. Depending on the theory, on what and how you're researching emotions, you might want to focus on a different component of emotion. Now let me go through these components once more, but this time I'll tell you why each of the components is problematic in the context of defining emotions. Please don't go away. I promise I'll put some interesting research on funny memes. Okay, so let's start with the cognitive component. Cognitive component. Some researchers claim that it's vital, as for example in appraisal theories of emotion, where the emotions are treated more like a process than states. I mean, after all, emotions don't really look like states, right? So in these theories, we focus on detecting and assessing the environment and how it affects our well-being. We check what we care about and what we don't care about. And based on how important to us a certain event or thing is, and how it affects our well-being, we get different emotions. Thus, you see that the cognitive assessment is quite crucial here. As for use in real life, maybe you have noticed that assessment of an event usually makes you feel more emotion than just stating what happened. For example, let's take a situation in McDonald's. You have a nice day, decide to get a Happy Meal that is not only for kids, but also for very serious and responsible adults. You order, wait, and receive your order. But then, when you prepare for consumption, you notice that there's no ketchup. That's a crime against humanity when you're forced to eat McDonald's fries without ketchup. Anyway, you can talk about situation and say, "That stupid bitch forgot my fucking ketchup again! How can you fail such a simple task?" That's of course a very hypothetical situation. I'm just imagining that something like that could happen. Totally never happened to me. Anyway, you might notice a lot of emotions and assessment in that statement. And wasn't only assessing the situation, but also the person that didn't put the ketchup in my order. It also contained an assumption that the woman preparing my order forgot the ketchup, while it could be a mistake of the machine that I used to enter my order, or maybe my eternal enemy stole it as per their plan to ruin my day. So, a lot of emotions, mainly anger and assessment in that statement. But imagine I did it with less emotion and appraisal, like this. I received my order without ketchup. And that's an observation without emotions.
Just an observation.
Saying that, I also feel less intense emotions, even though the event hasn't changed. I would have probably felt less anger, or maybe no anger at all, if I hadn't cared about the ketchup as well. So I hope you see now why cognitive components can be so vital in creating emotion. In fact, one of the methods to help you deal with your emotions is seeing the difference between your assessment/interpretation and just observation/stating facts without judgment of the situation. However, some researchers claim that this component is not necessary for emotion, like in James' Lange theory, where the interpretation of your body reaction causes emotions. But I'll elaborate that in a moment. You might also point out that you don't always consciously assess the situation, yet feel an emotion.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The assessment doesn't have to be conscious. Like, remember that cut from my previous video? This one. There was no conscious assessment of the situation, yet the cat certainly felt fear. So I guess the cognitive component of emotion can be subconscious. Neurophysiological component. As I promised, we're going back to James' Lange theory, which you could say started the focus on bodily symptoms in emotion creation. I can feel my heart beating so fast from the excitement. Wait, is it from excitement? Or maybe it's because of fear? Or maybe I'm angry and that's why my heart is about to escape my chest. I'm talking about feeling some kind of physiological arousal, but the problem is that it's very similar no matter if the emotion I'm feeling is excitement or anger. When Schechter and Singer developed their own theory of emotions, they based it on their own experiment. The participants were told that they would receive a suproxine injection. They didn't know, though, that some received a substance that has no therapeutic effect, aka placebo, while some received epinephrine.
What?
epinephrine after injection creates palpitation, tremor, and sometimes a feeling of flushing and accelerated breathing. So typical neurophysiological signs of arousal. Another variable among those who got the epinephrine was the explanation they got. One group was told about the effects of the injection they should expect. The other one was told that this injection would have no effect on them. There was also a group that was told the incorrect effects of the injections, such as numbness and itching. After the injections, the placebo ones as well, participants were also placed in different settings. In one set of conditions, the subject was placed together with a stooge who has been trained to act euphorically. In a second set of conditions, the subject was with a stooge trained to act in an angry fashion. The participants, of course, didn't know that the stooge was a fake, and were told that it was just another participant that received the same injection. That's a complicated scheme of experiment, but let's see what groups we had after all. You can notice that the real misinformation condition was not run in the younger sequence. This was originally conceived as a control condition, and it was felt that its inclusion in the euphoria conditions alone would be sufficient as a means of evaluating the possible artifactual effect for the real informed instructions. So what were the results of that experiment?
Guess what I've got.
It turned out that when the subject felt the physiological symptoms of arousal, received epinephrine, but had no explanation for that, wasn't told to expect those symptoms caused by injection, produced gave behavioral and self-report indications that they had been readily manipulated into the separate feeling states of euphoria and anger. I guess it suggests that the cognitive component is pretty important for emotion, and that James wasn't correct when he claimed that bodily symptoms are emotions. After all, the participants named differently the emotion they felt while they had the same bodily response.
He's wrong! You're wrong! The whole damn system is wrong! Ah!
But is the cognitive component enough then?
No, not really.
The subjects in this and other experiments that were given placebo and were suggested that they should feel a certain emotion showed significantly less intense emotion than those with induced bodily reactions. This implies that the interpretation of what they psychologically felt was crucial for the emotions. Speaking of that, let's consider another interesting phenomenon. Researchers have studied individuals who suffer from spinal injuries. The thing about them is that they have really reduced feedback from their body, so the bodily reactions, and it turned out that sometimes they report diminished emotional response. Patients with injuries very high on the cord were more likely to report a loss of emotional intensity. This would suggest that bodily reactions are indeed crucial to creating emotions. However, on the other hand, some researchers have noted that spinal patients generally continue to have rich and sometimes normal emotional lives. So maybe bodily reactions aren't that crucial to emotions, and emotions can be created without it? However, on the other hand, did I just get a third hand? Apparently, spinal patients can perceive their heartbeats and experience pain, which are included in the physiological symptoms. So they do receive some bodily reactions, but just a reduced amount of them. It could explain why the intensity of their emotions can be lower. Motivational component. If you've watched my previous video about the purpose of emotions, and if you haven't, you should, because I put there some nice memes, very valuable information. Anyway, if you've watched it, you should remember that I mentioned motivation as one of the purposes. We might now wonder if it's true in every case. I mean, when my sister broke my previous Mac, rest in pieces, I definitely felt emotions. But did I have a motivation to do anything? I didn't feel motivation to argue with her or to smash one of her Macs. Honestly, I didn't feel like doing anything. I was just sad and angry. Unless you count motivation to cry after my previous Mac. I don't know, you be the judge. It is also worth noting that motivation is also often paired with the cognitive component. Should I elaborate on that component? Nah, I guess it's pretty intuitive. Let's move on. Motor expression component. People traditionally consider smiles, chuckles, and the rest of facial and vocal expressions to be expressions of emotion. However, can it be crucial for creating and defining emotions? I bet you can recall a moment when you felt happiness and a big smile appeared on your face, or when you felt really stressed out and you stuttered while trying to answer the question on an exam.
Have you ever had a dream that you want.
It's also impossible to deny that in everyday life we often use these cues to recognize someone else's emotions, and sometimes these cues influence our emotions. I mean, you would assume that a person with such an expression is sad, right? Unless you have some deficits in recognizing other emotions, but that's a topic for another video. Facial expressions were very useful for Ekman when he researched on what emotions are universal across cultures. This way, he made a hypothesis that there were 5 basic emotions: joy, sadness, anger, disgust, and fear. Does it remind you about a certain movie? In secret, I'll tell you that there was another candidate. Surprise! However, it turned out that surprise wasn't distinctive enough from fear. But you might ask here, can there be emotion without facial and vocal expression? And that'd be very Ekman of you, because he pondered on a similar issue. And indeed, there are some studies suggesting that it is possible. It is worth noting, though, that sometimes facial expression might not be so obvious to us, as we can have micro-expressions. Some people even train not to show their emotions on their faces, and try to show poker face. There is also the facial feedback hypothesis, suggesting that an individual's subjective experience of emotion is influenced by their facial expressions. You've probably heard the saying, "fake it till you make it." It actually embodies the idea that if we act a certain way, we will begin to embody the role or the state of mind that we are enacting. Maybe you've also heard about an experiment that would test that hypothesis. To avoid the effect of feeling supposed to feel a certain way, rather than asking their participants to smile, Strack, Martin, and Stepper in 1988 had them hold a writing implement between their teeth. Holding it so mirrored the muscle movement used in a smile. Others were asked to hold it in their lips so that they would still hold the writing implement but without forcing a smile. You can try it yourself. However, I advise you to have the pencil or pen clean before you put it in your mouth. Anyway, those in teeth holding, aka smiling condition, reported greater enjoyment than did those in the other group. That suggests that facial expression can indeed influence the creation of emotions. Another research, conducted even before, in 1976, for instance, found that those participants asked to pose a strong reaction when receiving an electric shock experienced more negativity, as assessed on an electrodermal measure than did those who were asked to show no emotion. This experiment used a more automatic assessment of feeling, so the conclusion of facial feedback hypothesis wouldn't be based solely on self-report. You might remember some coaches talking about doing power poses and confident smile and stuff like that in order to actually feel more confident. I suppose it comes from this hypothesis. However, the thing is that researchers have shown that the strongest effects of this theory are for modulation, that is, amplification of what one is feeling, rather than initiation of emotions. That is, they appear to work to make us feel more or less of an emotion we are already feeling than they do to make us feel a new emotion. So it would work better if you started with some confidence and wanted to empower it than if you had no confidence to begin with at all. Moreover, the effects don't seem to be that spectacular as they can be advertised as. The positive finding was, though, that the effects are not just short-lived. When the facial feedback hypothesis has an effect, it tends to stay with us for a while. It's also worth remembering that there are some findings showing that there are both physiological and psychological benefits from maintaining positive facial expressions during stress. So I suppose trying to smile while under stress might be worth a try. However, don't assume telling depressed people to smile is going to magically cure their depression. It does not work like this. It's also important not to overdo it yourself, as just smiling won't keep you happy, and if the evidence from your environment is too contradictory, it might actually have the opposite effect. Like, the body might first think that you're happy because you're smiling, but later might see the contradictions and realize that you're smiling to make yourself happy, but actually you're sad. Boom! What an exception! Subjective feeling component. Finally, we arrived at the most problematic component. Yay! Why do I call it problematic? Because it's the most difficult one to research. The thing is that every feeling we feel is subjective, and the names we give them are subjective as well. You and your body might feel the same physical symptoms, the same cognitive aspects, have the same facial and vocal expression, and so on, and yet feel it subjectively different, and call it a different name. Is it confusing? I suppose so. However, it's not something new. Language has its limits, and it's not that rare when we, in theory, use the same words, yet have something entirely different in mind. Not convinced? Then I dare you to discuss happiness. You might quickly find out that everyone has something at least slightly different in mind while talking about it. In general, these linguistic barriers can cause quite some methodological issues, especially when we want to compare countries using different languages. But it's a topic for another video. Let's go back to subjective feelings. So is subjective feeling a crucial component of emotions? Well, I wouldn't be so sure to say so. I mean, have you ever heard or said something like, I am sad, but somehow I don't feel sad? Or that your other components of emotions like your smile, cheerful voice, experiencing fun stuff and so on suggest you that you're happy, and yet you somehow don't feel happy. Now you should say, yes, of course, because otherwise it's kinda awkward. Okay, I'll play it safe and just introduce you to the concept for alexithymia. And no, it's not just a combination of a person named Alex and that spice thymian. So if you're allergic to herbs, don't worry, you're safe. So what is alexithymia? Alexithymia is a disturbance of the experience and expression of emotions resulting in flattened or highly restrained affect and lack of awareness of emotions. So a person with that condition does have emotions, and these emotions influence their thoughts and behavior, but at the same time, they don't recognize them. The emotional experience, that subjective feeling component, is missing, and yet they do have emotions. These emotions are just disturbed when it comes to expressing them, and the person does not acknowledge them. Can you imagine it? Your body gets all tensed up, you're feeling dizzy, and yet you don't know that it's the result of the emotion you're having? That might cause even more emotions that you're not gonna be aware of, like a vicious circle. Okay, the video seems to be getting kinda long, so I guess it's time for conclusions. As you can see, answering a question on what emotion isn't that simple or easy. I tried to explain you shortly each potential component of emotion and why it would be problematic to assume it's the crucial one that decides if a phenomenon is an emotion or isn't. However, if you ask me, because why wouldn't you? Of course, my opinion is the most important one to you. Then I'd say that it's not about one crucial criteria, but meeting at least a few emotion components. Like, an emotion doesn't have to contain every single component I mentioned, or even more, but at least a few. How many exactly? I don't know. I guess I'd have to research it more deeply. I wanna use this opportunity though to highlight that such a situation is not that rare in psychology research. We often have to struggle with different definitions, theories, and so on, even when supposedly we're talking about the same thing. You can even check ICD or DSM, and you can notice that there isn't a specific exact definition or some disorder where you have to meet all the criteria to get diagnosed with. Usually you need to meet a certain amount of symptoms from a specified group. And actually, it occurs not only in psychology, but also in real life. We often have multiple definitions of the same word. For example, you can use a bat when you play baseball, but you shouldn't really use a bat, like, an animal, for it. It wouldn't work that well to bounce the ball with it, and it would hurt the poor little bat. And sometimes people talk about happiness, and to everyone it means a different thing. To one person it's more about money, to another one it's more about family, and to another one it's more about the work. That's why when you have a discussion, it is so important to talk about definitions, so each side is actually talking about the same thing, and not about a word that means something entirely different. You might have come to this video to find out what emotions are, and I tried to show you what you should consider while thinking about that. However, I would also like you to remember from this video that one word can have multiple definitions and theories, so it's important to specify which one you're talking about. And what about you? What is your understanding of an emotion? And don't go yet, it's October and Halloween is coming, the spooky season, and quite a lot of people enjoy it, as well as horror movies. So why don't we find out why we like to be scared and watch horror movies? I'm preparing a video on the psychology of Halloween, so if you want to find out why we love spooky stuff, subscribe and await my next video. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and slash or comment it and slash or share it with others. So that's it, and have a nice day!